You're watching Experience Comic Culture and Sales. Streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
2, 1.
Hey everybody, got another joke for you. Local United Way office realized that they had never received a donation from the town's most successful lawyer. So the volunteer in charge of doing the contributions and stuff decided to call him up and see if he could persuade him to make a donation. So he gets him on the phone and goes, our research shows that out of a yearly income of more than $600,000, you don't give any money to charity. Now, giving charity is both good for your soul, but it's also a good tax write-off. So would you like to give back to the community in some way? And the lawyer thinks about it for a moment and goes, when you were doing your research, did it show that my mother is dying of a long illness and has medical bills that are several times her annual income? And the volunteer guy's like, no, he goes, or did your research show that my brother, a disabled veteran, is blind and confined to a wheelchair? Guy from the United Way is just stammering. He's like, I'm sorry, and the lawyer says, did you find that my sister's husband died in a traffic accident, leaving her penniless with 3 children? And now the guy from United Way just feels absolutely awful. He's like, I'm sorry, sir. I had no idea. I just thought. He goes, that's right. You didn't think. And I don't give any money to them, so why the hell would I give any to you? Stay tuned for the Dan Wickline Show. Good evening, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are. Welcome to the Dan Wickline Show here on The Experience. Hello to Ed, hello to Triple B, and hello to JD, who's running the boards. We are going to do a bit of a Halloween-themed show today because, I woke up this morning and went, I don't know what the hell I'm going to talk about on the show today. So I thought, let's talk about some of Marvel's horror characters, because in the 70s, they spent some time coming up with horror characters like crazy. So there's some good ones. I got some honorable mentions, but I got 10 particular ones that stand out. So we're going to talk about them. But we're also going to do the news and go from there. It says, woohoo, Halloween. Yep. Now, I don't know what we're going to do tomorrow, but there's a good chance we're going to cover the DC horror characters, like the Creature Commandos and stuff like that, or horrible characters. Somebody asked me once what my favorite horror movie was, and I told them Showgirls. That quieted them down, because it's a horrible movie. All right, let's jump into the news. Now, we talked yesterday a little bit about Jonathan Majors, how the court case was going to be today, and there was different motions and trial and briefs being filed. Well, a New York judge has ruled that actor Jonathan Majors must face trial on domestic abuse charges. In a hearing Wednesday, New York Supreme Court Judge Michael Gaffey denied a defense motion to dismiss the case and set a start date of the trial of November 29th. Gaffey also revealed that the defense has filed a new motion under seal that seeks to keep details related to an undisclosed evidentiary matter shielded from public view. Now, defense attorney Seth Zuckerman asked Gaffey if there was an alternative to the secretive route, said the defense team had considered other ways but the answer is simply no. Due to the high profile of the case, he continued not shielding this aspect of the case would lead to such intense media scrutiny that would compromise his client's right to a fair trial. Now, Gaffney did not immediately rule on the latest defense motion, and prosecutors remained neutral on it. So the judge noted that media outlets and the public would be able to register any objections to the defense effort by November 6th. While the right to a fair trial is enshrined in the Constitution, the right to access is not absolute. Now, we could probably fathom a guess on what the information is they're trying to keep quiet. It may have to do with whatever happened in London while they were filming Loki. This seems to be turning back around where, it started off looking really bad for Majors, and then it started taking a turn. Well, now as things are getting closer, it's starting to seem to be turning back towards looking bad for Majors. We're going to have to see how all this plays out, but the next court case, like I said, is at the end of November. So, all right, moving on. When asked by Deadline if Marvel had a multi-season plan for Loki, or if the show is approached season by season, series producer Kevin Wright said, "We take it season by season, and there are certainly things that Tom and I and other casts have talked about where we see this going. And I know there's some excitement for that internally, but just from a storytelling point of view, I think we always conceived of season 1 and 2 as a whole unit, that these are 2 chapters of the same book, and that season 2 is finishing that book. And there are other stories to be told there, but I think they would be new books, if that's not too coy," he said. Now, when asked if season 2 will live up to the shocking ending that we got in season 1, he said, "I hope so. But what I will say is it's not a cliffhanger. We want to be able to deliver real fulfillment in what we're doing, but I do think that it'll be exciting and unexpected and everything people like about the show." So we got 3 episodes left. Expect a bit of conclusion, a bit of closure, that there could be more in the future, but this story will be somewhat wrapped up. Now, does that mean that they do another season? It'll take us away from the TVA and Loki will move on to something else? I don't know, but we shall see. Ed says he's really enjoying the hardcore intro jokes. Thank you. Hey, Kenneth, good to see you. Yeah, that's part of the fun is digging up those jokes and telling them, because to me, it's kind of like the monologue for the show. Like this is a late night show, and plus no one's ever going to hire me to host a late night show. All right, moving on. We've got some Marvel news. All the talk of Marvel kind of slowing down production and pacing things out more. Well, that seems to be coming true. At least if we follow the copyright filings that have been going on. And we've been getting some information from these filings, different characters, who they're playing, what they're listed as. Well, when they file these things, they give estimated release dates. So we have estimated release dates for 3 upcoming Marvel projects. And it's kind of interesting because they're quite a bit later than we originally expected. And these are some that have already filmed. Starting with Agatha, Darkhold Diaries, which is the 3rd title so far. It's said to be planned for September 19th, 2024. Now, we were expecting that one to come out either late 2023 or early 2024. So to see that it's pushed all the way to September of next year is kind of surprising. And it was announced back in 2022. So it does seem like, it's getting pushed a lot. Remember the animated Spider-Man series freshman year they were going to do? Well, that's still happening, and we're starting to hear some stuff about it now. But a lot of behind the scenes stuff had slowed it down. Not exactly sure what, but the release now is said to be November 2nd of 2024, so more than a year away. And finally, the third one, and this is one that was supposed to be spinning out of Black Panther Wakanda Forever. You know, we met Riri Williams, and there was going to be an Ironheart series, and it was going to have the Hood, and we were going to get possibly get Mephisto, with Sacha Baron Cohen playing him. Well, that project has been pushed back a lot. It's scheduled for September of 2025. So almost 2 years from now. Now, this was originally planned to come out this fall, as, like I said, as kind of a connector to Wakanda Forever. But I think part of why it's being moved is that they're tying the character into the upcoming Armor Wars movie that was originally a series, now it's a movie, starring Don Cheadle as War Machine, and him going out trying to get Tony's tech back. So it would make sense to bring Riri Williams' character in there as well. So I think that's why it's getting pushed back so much. But yeah, for something we thought we were going to get at the end of this year, and we're not going to get it till September of 2025, that is a big delay. So, all right, what else we got? We got, since Ahsoka came out during the SAG-AFTRA strike, the actors couldn't really go out and talk about the characters they're playing and stuff like that. And while we had the Disney Star Wars event where, we got to see footage, Ray Stevenson got to talk about playing Baylan Skoll, stuff like that. That was great, but there are certain characters that weren't announced yet, or at least confirmed. And one of them was Amon Esfandi playing Ezra Bridger. So he didn't get a chance to he hasn't done a chance to do any press or go out there talking about playing the character. But I guess they did film a video prior to the SAG-AFTRA strike with him talking about the character, and Disney and Star Wars have released it on social media. And when talking about Bridger, Esfandi said, "I take Ezra Bridger as a real person, and he's so smart. He's so gifted. He's grown into himself a lot more. He's become much stronger Jedi, but even more so, he's become more of a family member amongst his team and his crew of rebels." Now, the actor would go on to talk about becoming the character and how he gets into the character. And he says, "Because I already felt so connected to Ezra and felt like he was there whenever I needed him, I just felt that inspiration. But yeah, Ezra, young kid with a lot of heart, I got him." So it's nice to hear what he, because like I said, it wasn't confirmed that he was going to be in the series. So he hasn't had a chance to promote it or to really go out there and receive the accolades that people are giving about it, even though the show didn't do as well as expected, at least according to the numbers. Samba TV, which keeps track of streamer shows and how well the views they get within like the first 5 days of airing. Well, the Ahsoka finale only drew 863,000 viewers in the U.S. households, and that was during the first 5 days of release. Now, this absolutely pales in comparison to the other Star Wars Disney Plus shows. I mean, particularly Obi-Wan Kenobi, which a lot of people kind of say, that wasn't as popular or whatever. That finale brought in 1.8 million U.S. households. So it brought almost 1 million additional viewers in the first 5 days than Ahsoka did. Book of Boba Fett, another one that people are pretty down on, brought in 1.5 million. Mandalorian Season 3 finale brought in 1.4 million. And the season 2 finale of Mandalorian brought in 1.1 million. So you got to look at the Ahsoka character in the Ahsoka series and wonder, well, what was different here? Why did we not get as many people for the finale as these other ones got? Is this character just not as popular as, say, the Mandalorian, a brand new character, or Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi? And that's possible. But you also then have to wonder, is there going to be a second season of Ahsoka? Are those numbers too low? And also you have to wonder, the idea that this is leading towards a Dave Filoni movie, are the viewers connecting enough with these characters coming out of Clone Wars and Rebels that they're going to want to go to the theater and see a movie? They're all important questions, and it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. Now, I don't know if some of you know this, but there was a deal not that long ago that BBC made with Disney, and the new Doctor Who stuff is going to be showing on Disney Plus. Well, Disney and BBC has announced premiere dates for the 3 new Doctor Who 60th anniversary specials. These are the ones that are going to star David Tennant as the Doctor again. He's now going to be the 14th Doctor. He was the 10th Doctor for the long time, and then they made a War Doctor. He's like, well, technically he's the 11th Doctor, but he's the 10th Doctor, and now he's the 14th Doctor, but he might be the 15th Doctor. It's really confusing. I mean, the timey-wimey thing is bad enough, but now you're throwing in number changes, and numbers should be facts. They shouldn't change. But he's coming back, and so is Catherine Tate as Donna Noble. So that's going to be interesting to see those two return. But the actual specials, there's going to be one called The Star Beast, which will premiere on November 25th. There'll be one called Wild Blue Yonder, premiering on December 2nd, and then one called The Giggle on December 9th. Now, the Doctor and Donna are going to come face to face with what they're calling their most terrifying villain yet, the Toy Maker, which is actually a character from early Doctor Who that they're bringing back. And he's going to be played by Neil Patrick Harris, who is making his Doctor Who debut. All of these will premiere on Disney Plus globally, except in the UK and Ireland, where they will air on the BBC. Now, these 3 specials with David Tennant will then lead into the new incarnation of Doctor Who, which Russell Davies has returned to helm, and we'll have a new Doctor played by Nkuti Gatwa. Again, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name right, who will take over as the 15th Doctor, or whatever number he is. And that'll start in 2024. So lots of Doctor Who stuff coming up for the 60th anniversary. And I think that pretty much covers the news. So we're going to take a break. I'll check to see if anything is broken since we started. And if not, we'll come back and we'll talk about Marvel's horror characters. Be right back.
Join the party. Head over to our link tree to find all the links for everywhere the experience is all the time.
To be continued. 3 little words that hold the secret to the next great story. 3 words that will thrill you, confound you, give life to new possibilities. Every variation of To Be Continued is a promise of adventure, a promise of excitement, a promise of unseen wonders and unexplored worlds. A promise that every issue you read makes you a part of a never-ending journey. And behind every page, there will be an unopened door waiting for you. This story to be continued at your local comic book shop. Visit comicshoplocator.com today.
Go follow the experience on TikTok at @the_EXP1 or scan the QR code on the screen. Our TikTok is like everywhere else we are, except you only have to deal with us for a minute. Seems like a win-win to me.
Welcome back to the Dan Wickline Show here on The Experience. Remember to stick around. We've got comic collectibles coming up tonight. We have 360 comics, and we have Kicking It with Henri. So no talk and treat trivia tonight. Chuck had to take the day off. But other than that, there's your lineup right there. Yep. So let's talk Marvel horror. Now, the interesting thing about Marvel horror is everybody looks to the 70s for Marvel horror, but the truth is that Marvel was horror before it was superheroes. When it was still Atlas Comics, and as it turned into Marvel, Stan was doing monster books and, stuff with Jack and Steve Ditko and stuff like that. They were doing Tales to Astonish, Tales of Suspense. And even when they started to switch to superheroes, they did it very slowly, clinging on to their monster roots. Because you look at, what was the first superhero book for Marvel? Fantastic Four, but it wasn't a superhero book. It wasn't Captain America. It wasn't, they could have brought him back. They had other heroes like Human Torch and Submariner. They could have done a Superman-like book or a Batman-like book. Instead, they did something that was basically the Challengers of the Unknown. And not, the Fantastic Four, they don't go up against Doctor Doom or Galactus or anything like that. They go up against the Mole Man with his subterranean creatures and his giant monster. And even the Thing is a monster. So it's not a clear-cut superhero book until later on, and they dealt with monsters in a lot of ways. So, I think the origins of Marvel is based in those kind of stories. It's what Stan and Jack and all them were doing before they started doing heroes. And then you look at what was like one of the next big books they did. It was the Hulk, which was basically Jekyll and Hyde with a giant gray-skinned, then green-skinned monster. So the idea that Marvel, didn't get into horror until the 70s is not really true. And then when they did it very tepidly because there was a lot going on with the Comics Code Authority, things they weren't allowed to show. You couldn't have the undead and stuff like that. So they had to kind of dance around it. And they did that in the late 60s. They started pushing the envelope by coming up with characters like, in 1968, they created Mephisto, who seemed like a pretty straightforward satanic character, but they kind of kept him just a step or two back so as not to upset the code, Or in 1969, they created Agatha Harkness, who's a straight up witch, and you weren't allowed to have witches in your books. And they found, they kind of got it around it. Or, they wanted to introduce a vampire. You couldn't have vampires in comics in the 60s and 70s. So they created Morbius, the living vampire. And he was living because, again, they couldn't have the undead in a comic book. But once those characters started coming out, the dam broke. And the Comic Code Authority started allowing classic horror monsters like vampires and werewolves and zombies to be in comics. And they allowed them to start going a little darker. So Marvel jumped right in and started creating characters. Like, they did the Tomb of Dracula comic and Werewolf by Night and Ghost Rider. It's just the way they jumped into it. And they ended up creating a lot of characters in the 70s that had these horror roots. And we're going to go through them. I've got 10 particular, but before we jump into those 10, there are some honorable mentions that I didn't dive too deeply into, but like Morbius is one of them. There's The Living Mummy was another one that they tried to dance around the code for a while. Hannibal King was a character out of Tomb of Dracula. Lilith, the Black Rose. The Spider-Man villain Man-Wolf was them trying to do a werewolf character, but it was a space or a moonstone or something that turned him into the Man-Wolf. Or, they had Damien Hellstrom, who was pretty much the son of Satan. That one, I think, was once everything started breaking, and that was an interesting era because you'd get those kind of movies and stuff that would be stuff like Son of Satan and, Manos Hands of Fate. So, or Satana, Damien's sister. So you had a lot of characters like that would start coming out. Or do you guys remember Terror Inc., the private detective with the green skin and the points? And they tried to bring him back at one point. So interesting character. But let's dive into these 10 characters that I think are kind of it. And we're going to start with Moon Knight. Now, I know you may not think of Moon Knight as a horror character at first, but he first appeared in Werewolf by Night, number 32, by Doug Mensch and Don Perlin. He's a mercenary named Mark Spector who gets killed on a mission by a team leader and left for dead when he's saved by the Egyptian god Khonshu to become his fist of vengeance. Now, early on, he was kind of a light version of Batman, or a darker version of Batman. And he had these other personas he would use to get information, or he lived under the name Stephen Grant, a millionaire. He was a cabbie as Jake Lockley. So he got away from being Mark Spector. And that, of course, has turned into dissociative personality disorder. Also, he's taken on the name Mr. Knight, which seems to be a personality variance from Moon Knight. It's really weird, but he really was just, when he got created, he was a Batman pastiche that they threw into the comic to just fill a month, a 2-month spread, and people loved the character. And I think a lot of it was the design and less what they actually did with the character, because there wasn't much to him. But he's grown over the years to be a really popular character. And of course, he has made his live action debut in the Disney Plus series played by Oscar Isaac. Now, the series was interesting because they kept stuff like the multiple personalities. We got to see Jake and Steven early on. We find out about Mark. and or not Jake, Mark and Steven early on. Then we find about Jake later. But we also lose a lot of the things that make the character, like his allies, Marlene and Frenchie. They're gone. Um, but we get introduced to a character who's his wife, who then goes on to become the Scarlet Scarab. So they created a character to kind of fill the Marlene role. Just kind of interesting there. Now, again, I don't know if I would label him necessarily as a horror character, but he has dealt with Dracula and werewolves and stuff like that. So he's more of a guy that shows up in horror situations. And I guess he's a part of the Marvel's horror-inspired team, the Midnight Suns. So I guess that's kind of the guide of whether or not you're a horror character is if you're in the Midnight Suns. And I don't necessarily mean the video games, because the video games went, oh, we need to bring in more popular characters like Wolverine. Anyway, okay. Another character that technically is horror is Doctor Strange. Now, of course, he had first appeared in Strange Tales 110. Now, he's credited as being created by Steve Ditko, even though Stan Lee scripted the first adventure. This is a character that Ditko gets pretty much solo credit on. He was a world-renowned surgeon named Stephen Strange, who, after a car accident, was unable to use his hands for the delicate work of being a surgeon. So he looked into like every possible way to cure his hands, spiritual, mystical, everything. And this led him to the Ancient One. Now, he never learned how to fix his hands, but he did learn how to become the Sorcerer Supreme. And, that puts him up against demons and other horrific creatures and going to other dimensions and stuff like that. So there's a lot there. It has kind of a H.P. Lovecraft touch to it. Now, he's been portrayed twice in live action. The first time all the way back in 1978 in a television movie starring Peter Hooton. If you have not seen it, you can find it on YouTube. It's kind of worth watching. He doesn't have the standard outfit or anything like that, but there's just enough in there that you go, yeah, that's a Doctor Strange movie. So it's kind of fun. It's a 1970s movie, but it's kind of fun. And of course, more recently, he is played by Benedict Cumberbatch. And I'm surprised how much of the trappings of Doctor Strange from the comics they retained. They kept Wong, getting him played by Benedict Wong, though instead of being a manservant, he's become, an equivalent to Doctor Strange, which I like. The Ancient One they had played by Tilda Swinton. They did introduce Dormammu, who was voiced by Benedict Cumberbatch as well. And then they just introduced Clea, played by Charlize Theron. So this is another character that kind of goes between the mainstream and horror. But again, he's a member of the Midnight Suns, so he gets his horror card. One of the more recent created characters is Elsa Bloodstone. Now, she appeared in Bloodstone #1 in 2001 by Dan Abnett, Andy Lanning, and Michael Lopez, but she's actually the daughter of an older Monster Hunter character from the 70s, like when Marvel was doing all their horror books, Ulysses Bloodstone. And Ulysses used the blood gem to aid him in his hunting. It gave him certain powers and stuff like that. Now, Elsa has exhibited superhuman strength, speed, durability, and endurance, plus a regenerative healing factor, which it's not exactly clear where that ability comes from. There are times we see her wearing the blood gem that she got from her father. So it could be from that she gets the power. But there's other times she's not wearing it, and they say that because he wore it constantly, it kind of seeped into his DNA, and when he fathered Elsa, those traits passed on to her, and she doesn't need it. Now, I don't know if Marvel's ever made it official one way or the other, but it's kind of interesting. Now, she made her live action debut just last year in the Werewolf by Night special, played by Laura Donnelly, along with the corpse of her father. So Ulysses also got introduced. Now, she's kind of a souped up version of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, even though both Abnett and Lanning swore at the time they created the character that they had never seen a full episode of Buffy. They knew who the character was, but it just wasn't that, they just wasn't that affected by it. Definitely a horror character, and of course, a member of the Midnight Suns. Now, this next character is interesting because she's kind of got two sets of creators. Ilana Rasputina first appeared in Giant Size X-Men #1 as the sister of Peter Rasputin, the mutant known as Colossus. Now, she would later be kidnapped and pulled into Limbo, where she was imprisoned by the demon Velasco, where she learned sorcery, she learned to master her mutant powers, and would eventually take over and lead Limbo. So the original little girl, Ilana Rasputina, was created by Len Wein and Dave Cockrum, while the character of Magic that we later meet in the Storm and Illyana miniseries was created by Chris Claremont and Sal Buscema. So you don't really get it that often where, it's like this incarnation of the character was created by this person, and then this happened, and a whole new creative team get credit for her. Now, her mutant ability is actually the ability to create teleportation discs. Claremont actually used Larry Niven's disc worlds, how they transport through the teleportation discs, as the inspiration for Magic's powers. But besides having that mutant ability, she also has the ability to cast spells, use sorcery. She has her own eldritch armor, and she carries the soul sword. So there's a lot to this character beyond just her mutant ability. Now, she first appeared in live action in 2020 in the New Mutants movie, played by Anna Taylor-Joy. Though we don't know if that's currently not canon, but we don't know what Marvel's going to end up doing with the X-Men. So there's always a chance that she ends up coming back. Who knows? Now, though a bulk of her life was spent fighting demons in Limbo, I still seem to think of her as an X-Men and a New Mutant. I don't really think of her as a horror character, but just when I thought that was the case, she's also a member of the Midnight Suns. So there it is. There's your your stamp of horror, being a member of the Midnight Suns. Moving on to Ghost Rider. Now, there's multiple incarnations of Ghost Rider over the years, but we're going to focus on Johnny Blaze, who first appeared in Marvel Spotlight #5 by Roy Thomas, Gary Friedrich, and Mike Plug. Now, basic story, you probably know it, makes a deal with Mephisto to save his adopted father, who was dying of cancer, and devil keeps his word. Johnny's adopted father is cured of cancer, and then dies doing a motorcycle stunt during the stunt show. So it's like, oh yeah, I saved him, and now he's dead. Well, Johnny got cursed, bonded to a demon called Zaroth, yeah, who, when with Johnny, becomes the spirit of vengeance. So, he's out there collecting souls for Mephisto, stuff like that, has the penance stare. This is a really strong character, and he popped up in his own movies. In 2007, played by Nicolas Cage, was the first Ghost Rider movie. Then we got a sequel in 2012, and then later, a different version of Ghost Rider, Robbie Reyes, showed up on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., played by Gabriel Luna. So this is a character who's, probably and is probably going to be back. I would be surprised if he doesn't show up in the MCU very soon. But when they created him, it's interesting because that was what was popular at the time. Evel Knievel was popular. Team America was popular. So a superhero motorcycle riding, stunt driving, flaming skull was just a moment in creating a character. And of course, he was part of the Midnight Suns. I think we're seeing a trend here. All right, after that, we get what might be the most popular horror character. Now, you might think it's Ghost Rider, but there's also Blade. Now, Blade was created by Marv Wolfman and Gene Colan as kind of a supporting character to Dracula in the Tomb of Dracula number 10. And he went on to have 3 live-action movies. Now, Blade is known as the Daywalker because he's not your typical vampire. He wasn't bit, he was born. His mother, Lady Tara Vanessa Cross Brooks, was pregnant and ended up needing a place to give birth. She ended up at a brothel where the doctor was called. The doctor turned out to actually be a vampire named Deacon Frost, who drained Tara of all her blood, but in doing so, passed along some of the vampiric enzyme to the fetus, so that when Eric was born, Eric being his name, he had some traits of a vampire without being a full-on vampire. Now, was this still them trying to skate the code at the time? Maybe. I think that the code had lined up at that point, but I think they were still trying to be good about it. So the Blade movies were very popular when they came out, the first 2 specifically. The third one, not as much, but those Blade movies are very underrated in my opinion. Love them, according to Ed. Of course, it starred Wesley Snipes. They introduced Hannibal King, somebody I mentioned earlier, played by Ryan Reynolds. It's an interesting set of films. The first one is absolutely great. Deacon Frost is in it. One of my favorite movie lines of all time, which is, "Some mother effers are always trying to ice skate uphill." I use that in my general talk every day. But along with the popularity of the movies, they did a TV spin-off show, which was led by rapper Sticky Fingers. I really wish he would just use his real name, but Sticky Fingers. And Marvel is planning on bringing Blade back. We heard his voice at the end of the Eternals. He's going to be played by Mahershala Ali, but this is going very slow. And yes, he's part of the Midnight Suns. You getting this, right? This connection here? All right. JD says, yes, I love both of the Blade movies. Those 2 movies are really good. He pretends the third movie doesn't exist. In the 70s, once they could start doing these classic things, Marvel also just straight up went, we're taking that and dropping it in. And they did that with Frankenstein's monster. Now, it's hard to say who created the character because it was Mary Shelley. This is Mary Shelley's character, but Stan Lee and Joe Manley introduced Frankenstein's monster in the pages of Menace number 7. And this was all the way back in 53, and they would just kind of bring him back every few years. So he came from the Atlas Comics into Marvel, and they didn't try to reinvent the wheel here. He is still the work of Victor Frankenstein, sewn together from various corpses and then reanimated. But unlike everyone else on this list, Marvel hasn't really brought a version of this character to live action. Now, I don't think they're going to, because Frankenstein has kind of become a character that only Universal can really do. And it's not because you can't do one. It's that the Boris Karloff version of the Frankenstein's monster is so iconic that any other version just doesn't feel like Frankenstein's monster. Whether you're talking about the Hammer horror films, which are great, but their version of the monster just doesn't feel right. Or you get somebody like Robert De Niro, and you do a movie with Kenneth Branagh, and it still doesn't feel right. Or a Hugh Jackman movie with Van Helsing, the design that they came up with Boris Karloff is just so strong that I don't know if there'll ever be another good, fresh Frankenstein, and I don't see Marvel being the one to try it. And no, he's not part of the Midnight Suns. He was part of Kang's Unliving Legion, but not the Midnight Suns. So, okay, moving on to one of the best named characters, Man-Thing. Now, this character kind of gets 4 creators because it was a very unique process. And this process comes from Roy Thomas. He talks about how it works. He said prior to the release of Savage Tales #1 in 1971, where Man-Thing was introduced, Stan Lee called Roy Thomas into his office and said, okay, I've got an idea for a character. Here's the basic idea. He's a scientist. He's working on something for the government. Spies show up. He ends up taking the serum that he's making to prevent the spies from getting it. He goes out into the swamp and ends up, merging with the swamp and becoming this swamp-like character. And we're going to call it Man-Thing. And they call it that because they had a previous type of Man-Thing in the past that Stan did a couple times. They would use that name. Now, Roy didn't like the name because they already had the Thing and thought it would be confusing. But Stan was adamant, and he expanded on the plot and passed it off to Gary Conway, who, along with artist Gray Morrow, would do the first Man-Thing story. And the origin I gave of Man-Thing is pretty much straightforward. Ted Sallis, I believe he was actually working on recreating the Captain America Super Soldier Serum. When the spies show up, he injects himself with it to basically protect the serum and passes out in the swamp where he becomes the Man-Thing. Story-wise, it's very similar to Swamp Thing, which I believe came out right after Man-Thing. And the people working on the book were like, roommates, I think, Len Wein and Gary Conway. So there's a lot of stuff there. But Man-Thing is supposed to have come out first. And of course, it had the great title of the one-shot, the giant-sized Man-Thing, which people love. He has made his live-action debut twice. The first time back in 2005, a little known straight to Sci-Fi Channel movie where he was played by Conan Stevens, and they treated him almost like the shark from Jaws, where we saw everything else but Man-Thing. They avoided actually showing it to him, which is great for budget, but not as great for a movie called Man-Thing. So more recently, he appeared, of course, in the Werewolf by Night special, played by Kerry Jones. Kerry, of course, is both a actor stuntman and a special effects guy. And he also played Black Chrysanthemum in the Boba Fett series. So he is Man-Thing and a Wookiee. That's kind of cool. Yeah, and of course, he's part of the Midnight Suns. So you're getting that pattern. It says, and gave us the classic comic joke with the release of Giant Size Man-Thing. Exactly. All right, we got 2 more we're going to cover. We'll do these quickly. Werewolf by Night, of course. There's two versions of Werewolf by Night, but we're going to focus on Jack Russell, created by Roy Thomas, Jeannie Thomas, Gary Conway, and Mike Ploog in Marvel Spotlight #2. Now, no one claims that they named him Jack Russell because they thought it'd be funny to give him the name of a dog. Gary Conway actually claims that he never had a dog growing up, doesn't know dog names, and it's just a coincidence that they named him Jack Russell. Yeah, I believe you. He's the typical wolfman. He's descendant of a curse on the family. Goes all the way back to 1795, where his ancestor fought against Dracula and was cursed by the werewolf thing, and it went down the line. Smells like BF, yeah. BS, yeah. Now, the character was part of the 70s horror movement, but I don't think he ever got as popular as some of the other characters like Morbius or Moonight, who was created as a foil for him. But he's kind of popped up every once in a while over the years. The special they did recently with Gael Garcia Bernal as Jack Russell was absolutely brilliant. And I think that it kind of shoved him back into prominence. But nobody really knows what they're going to do with the character of Werewolf by Night or any of these other horror characters that have been introduced. It seems like they really should just come around to doing a Midnight Suns movie. You know, you've got all these great characters. Black Knight is a Midnight Suns. There's other characters that have popped up. They have them all laying around. They should do something. All right, the final character, and this kind of goes with Frankenstein's monster, is that in the 70s when things got loosened up, Marvel just said to hell with it. We're going to make Dracula. They made a book called Tomb of Dracula by Gary Conway, Gene Colan, and Marv Wolfman, and they didn't even bother to change it. It's Bram Stoker's character, just hands down. While he started off as in Tomb of Dracula, they kind of made him the protagonist. You know, he was not necessarily the bad guy, kind of an anti-hero at times. But after the initial run, they just kind of threw that away, and he's been an antagonist ever since. He's gone against Blade, a few other people. He even showed up against the X-Men at a couple different points. I think he turned Storm into a vampire for a while. He has made a live-action debut, Marvel's version of Dracula, where Frankenstein hasn't. And JD's not going to know this because he doesn't believe this movie exists. He appeared in Blade Trinity, played by Dominic Purcell from Prison Break, or as Heatwave in the Arrowverse. So Dracula does exist in the DC universe, at least in the Blade part of it. JD says, nope, didn't happen. But it's been more than a decade since he appeared in the comics. They tried to bring him back into the X-Men for a while. I don't know how much Marvel would want to deal with trying to, with potentially lawsuits from Universal. So there's a good chance they're going to stay away from Dracula, and they'll stay away from Frankenstein's monster when they have all these other horror characters, plus the honorable mention ones I said earlier, like Living Mummy, and they've got Morbius if they need a vampire, and so they've got plenty there. So those are the basic Marvel horror characters. They spent a lot of time in the 70s doing horror comics, and then they've just kind of kept the characters around. Like, look, we'll throw Man-Wolf in. Hey, Morbius will show up. Let's do something with Werewolf by Night. Or they take on their own life, like Moon Knight and Doctor Strange and Elsa Bloodstone. So it's interesting to see what these characters have done, how they've melded with the rest of Marvel. That's the neat thing about Marvel, is that they'll do any genre and then still kind of merge everything together. So you have an episode where you have Dracula taking on the X-Men. JD says, I mean, it did have Ryan Reynolds being Ryan Reynolds, Parker Posey being Parker Posey, and Triple H being a doofus, so not all bad. And it had Patton Oswalt being Patton Oswalt. So Ed says, I love to see Marvel do a MonsterVerse and move away from the hero stuff for a while. I don't know about move away from the hero stuff, but I do agree that they could just kind of go, okay, we're going to go over here and do this. So you have that if you want to watch it. And then we're still going to do this over here and do that over there. So we're going to do our sci-fi stuff over here. We're doing our hero stuff over here and our horror stuff over here. And you get one movie from each a year. Maybe a series. That would work. So, all right, we're not doing our late commercial because I don't want to, and we're running out of time. But thank you guys for tuning in. Again, tomorrow, I'm not sure exactly what the topic's going to be, but there's a good chance it could be DC's horror characters. So I was able to put this together today. We'll see what happens tomorrow. And that's it. Thank you for tuning in. Remember to stick around for Comic Collectibles, 360 Comics, Kicking It with Henri. Also, I want to congratulate James, the Mint Hunter. He didn't do his show last night, and the reason is they're pregnant. He and his wife are pregnant. So, well, I'm hoping she's pregnant and he's not, because that could get really weird if it's him, but I'm assuming it's her. So, all right, guys, have a great night. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Join the party. Head over to our Linktree to find all the links for everywhere the experience is all the time.